Lord. Belonging, possessions, and purpose. I'm going to talk about those three briefly this evening. The gospel asks us to be rich in the sight of God, and that we're not called to hoard things. That's what the gospel is sort of talking about here. We have this story of Jesus that Jesus tells this parable about someone who hoards things. And we've had sometimes generations of people who hoard things, who hold things close to themselves. They perhaps never pass things on, and they perhaps don't necessarily share things or dispose of things. There was a generation of people, not too many of them alive today, who lived through the Depression, who grew up during the Depression and knew the times of financial instability. And they've had this sort of a psychological conditioning to hoarding. But that sometimes can happen with kids as well. I know I've been into my sister's home, and I've never seen so many teddy bears in my niece's bedroom. Teddy bears and dolls, and there's hundreds of them. Sort of almost like hoarding them. I sort of think, should some of those be passed on? Sometimes I've found, and maybe we've found this as well, sometimes we have this idea that we own things, that these are our possessions. But I think what the Gospel's reminding us, and our readings are reminding us today, is that possessions are not really ours. We shouldn't feel like we've got an entitlement to anything. Sometimes we receive a gift, and that should inspire us to be generous ourselves. Not necessarily to say, well, I've got a fancy teddy bear, or I've got a nice car, or whatever gift it might be. That our possessions are there for sharing. They're not really our possessions. They're sort of given to us on trust, and that we then share them. I think that's the challenge of what our readings are talking about tonight. All of us have possessions. But do we use those possessions so we bottle them up in ourselves? Or do the possessions that we have, do they help to bring about the kingdom of God? Do they help to bring people into a deeper and a closer relationship with God? And that's what the readings are reminding us about. That our real purpose is not to be able to hoard things and have as many possessions and the best bank account, the nicest house, and so on. That's not what it's about. We have possessions, and we use those possessions to bring about the kingdom of God. And we can do that from the very young who are here in the church, but to the very old. That we don't just sort of think, this is mine and I won't share it with my sister or brother. I won't share this toy with somebody else. No, I've got to hold on to these for the rest of my life. And so you end up getting hundreds of bears or whatever it is. Or do we say, maybe there's a place, even for the young, can we be generous? Can we share and perhaps even extend or pass on things that we have? Which takes us to belonging. So we've talked a bit about possession, and we've talked a little bit about purpose. I'm going to come back to purpose in a second. But belonging. The second reading, the Christian community were trying to work out, who do they belong to? Are they Romans? Are they Jews? Are they Greeks? Are they Gentiles? Are they slaves? Are they free men? Who do they belong to? And I think that's a question for us too. Who do we belong to? And the response is, what we hear at the end of our second reading tonight is that we belong to Christ, and that Christ is in everything and in everyone. Who do we belong to? We belong to Christ. And that's what happens through baptism. We're dressed as saints, and we become heirs of God's kingdom. St. Augustine talked about that we are predestined for heaven. God's designed us for heaven. And so we could say that we belong to God, and that our lives are there to bring about God's kingdom now. And we do that by having a purpose. And our purpose is not just to look after ourselves or to look after our own things, but it is to bring about the kingdom of heaven. And we do that through love, through kindness, through generosity, through extending the possessions we have and sharing them with others. So who do we belong to? You can think, oh, we might belong to mum or dad, we might belong to our parents or our grandparents, maybe. Maybe we belong to Australia, maybe. Our Christian response is that we belong to God, that we are made by God, we are made for God to bring the love of God to the world, to bring God's kingdom into the world now and to have a preparation for heaven. And that's what we are made for as well. So what do we belong to? We belong to God. What are our possessions for? They're not just for ourselves, they are there for building up God's kingdom, for sharing with others. And what is our purpose? Our purpose is to walk this way of God's kingdom this day and